in the midst of all this. And, you know, it feels like it's escalating. You know, you saw the clip, the video of the gentleman getting his neck, you know, kneed on in the East Village too, you know, a few weeks ago for not social distancing. And to see it happen again and to cost somebody their life in Minneapolis is such an affront to humanity right now at a time where people are really struggling to get by. The added stress of knowing that you might be the next one that the police want to end, is terrifying.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to have opportunities to talk more about policing and education, particularly the police in schools as the interview goes on. But yeah, so just to start off the interview, changing gears a little bit, something a little more positive, a little more hopeful. This question is for both of you. What is your favorite teaching experience? Jabari, why don't you go first?
I love my students. I want to say my favorite, so this wasn't in the classroom per se. This was at one of their dance recitals. They are in like, a lot of them are in this dance troupe. I teach middle school, I teach 6th and 7th, and often do things at school, like, you know, events at whatever or wherever. And they had one at a church, and someone distributed invites to their performance in all the teachers' mailboxes. And so I saw it, and it was actually around the corner from my house. So I was like, definitely like, tonight's for not doing the campaign. I'm going to see my kids dance. And they had no idea I was showing up. And like, not many teachers even like, because it was just like a last minute thing. And I was like one of the few that were there, and they were like, Mr. Brisport, what? And like, one of my kids, I'm going to call him E. He was like so hard to break through his shell, because I don't know what happened to him in like previous schools, whatever, but he just walked with like an immediate distrust of teachers. Like, he was like, teachers don't care about students, they don't care about us, they don't care. That's like his attitude. And like, he was so happy to see me at that dance recital. They had to do like some dance where they go through the aisles, and he broke the fourth wall, was to be like, hey, Mr. Brisport, like get back to it. And seeing him light up like that was, I think, such a big success for me in this entire year. Like, getting through E's shell, knowing and just reminding him that teachers care about our students was worth so much to me.
That's fantastic. That's such a lovely story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. What about you, Naomi?
Thank you for having me. First of all, it's really great to be talking to all of you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks. I think, you know, it's been really hard this semester to find any hope for my students, really. And people have been suffering with a lot of anxiety and feeling a lot of despair. But a really lovely moment this semester was I was teaching a class on community activism and climate change. And we actually I invited Jen Jana Tapachitaiti to our class, and I'm sorry for butchering her last name. And she talked about her community activism on waste inequity and environmental justice in Brooklyn. And she was just so down to earth. I just saw my students light up and really see like that you can make a difference. She talked really about like the block by block building she had done. And, you know, and was really accessible in ways that made it, I don't know, it shifted. There was something that it really shifted in the tenor of our conversation to really recognize like, you know, just local work that people can do, talking to their neighbors and getting involved and just looking out their window and trying to figure out what the hell is going on and how can I get to the bottom of this and how can I change it. So that was really like a lovely, uplifting moment in the semester to show people how to get involved in community activism.
Great, thanks both for sharing. So I guess considering that the switch that teachers have been forced to go through, given the whole COVID lockdown, I think a lot of people understand that there's a lot of challenges facing teachers right now. And I know, Naomi, you just spoke to some of the challenges that you feel that you're facing right now as a teacher, but I'd love to hear a bit more from both of you about something that's been challenging for you, that's something that people might not necessarily expect right away.
Thanks. I mean, I just want to start by sharing something really lovely, which is that I've gotten a window into some of my students' life that I never had an opportunity to have before. And in some ways, that's so, so beautiful. I think the very first day of distance learning, one of my students introduced me to his dog, and his dog is named Pepsi. And he wanted me to meet Pepsi. And that's something that never would have happened inside the school building. And Pepsi's adorable. I can tell my student loves him. I've seen my students in shower caps. I've seen them eating their breakfast. I've seen a whole other side of them. But then I also see, like, you know, the other side, which is, I guess, the confirmation of their home living situation, the stuff you kind of know as a teacher, or that you can intuit, but that you never get a chance to see directly. And you know, the times when some of them, you know, they unmute so they can answer a question. I hear how noisy and raucous it is in their house, or like sometimes the cursing, or just, you know, the people that are, you know, the living situation that's not conducive to getting education. I just want to applaud them 10,000 times for still showing up and logging on and being part of the class and doing that. And it's hard to know that I can't be there for them as much as I would be there for them as a teacher. I mean, you know, it's not like I'm there to be over their shoulder in case they really need a little extra help, or just make sure they have the supplies. I mean, I can do a pencil from, you know, from behind the computer screen. So it's hard to know that I am kind of separated from them, and I can't, you know, help them in that certain way. And it's, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but then it just gets even scarier, the thought that the governor might want to extend this sort of like distance learning and digitized learning when it's a woefully inadequate way of doing this.
Yeah, I think just add to that, was beautiful. And I really relate to, you know, meeting my students' roommates and their sisters and brothers and their parents, and just like getting to connect and seeing them as whole people in this whole other way in their context has been really, I feel much closer to them in many ways. I think one of the most challenging things about teaching in this environment, this moment, has been trying to figure out how to teach equitably and justly when our students don't have internet. Many of them don't have the right computer gadgets, or if any computer gadget, they're sharing them with all their family members. They're teaching their younger siblings, in my case with college students at Brooklyn College. So, you know, and trying to figure out what works for different people, because for some of them, the live what we call synchronous learning, when you have a Zoom call or whatever, was really important to keep them engaged and keep them connected. They really wanted to talk to people and feel like they were part of a community. But for other students, they didn't have the literal bandwidth, like the internet bandwidth, and wanted asynchronous, like wanted lectures delivered. And then, you know, so it's like, how do we quickly adjust and figure out what works for a range of students with different needs, and keep them engaged and connected with that when they don't have the resources that they need to do that. So, and I think another aspect in terms of the working conditions of my colleagues has been trying to figure out really quickly how to develop a trauma-informed approach to education, and how to shift gears and figure out what's most important about what we're teaching and how to be there for them. So I think that and knowing ourselves how to, I know many of my colleagues have been paralyzed by just, you know, constant emails where students are reporting the trauma and the losses that they've gone through, and knowing how can we be there for them in the best way, and feeling really inadequate and paralyzed that we're not doing enough and that we can't get them what they need. Has been a real challenge to figure out how to work through that.
Thank you both for sharing and for hopping on just what must be a long train of Zoom calls in your lives as teachers.
We're sorry to add one more, but grateful you could be here. Yeah, both of you, what you were saying really, I think, strikes the idea that a school, and again, we'll also talk about this a little bit later, but a school is not just a place where, you know, we shove information into students' heads. It's a community, and it's a community gathering space, and it's in many ways the center of communities, and that in-person that in-person experience is what creates vibrant communities together. It's how, children make lifelong friends. It's how parents can come together. It's how teachers can come together. And I think that, I'm really glad that both of you are really resisting Governor Cuomo's attempts to, kind of make this permanent. I don't know how he's going to, because the parents I've been talking to seem to be at their wits' end. So, yeah. But on that note, this is a question for Naomi. Obviously, there are some really savage budget cuts to CUNY coming down the line. There's reports that John Jay has actually is not rehiring any of its adjunct professors. Really just horrible, frightening stuff. So my question for you is, how are CUNY professors resisting really this savage austerity?
Yeah, I think we're at the beginning or the middle. CUNY has been defunded for 50 years. So in some ways, this has been going on for a very long time. But exactly as you said, Daniel, it's the cuts that are proposed. And there's a ton of uncertainty, and there hasn't been budget transparency. So we don't exactly know what's coming down the line. And so we're preparing, and we're preparing to resist. We're resisting. One of the ways we're resisting is just to really challenge the idea that these are inevitable and unavoidable cuts, that nothing can be done, and that there's simply just not enough money, and trying to push back at that message and reject the kind of austerity logic that says that this is just inevitable and that there's no other way. And we know that austerity is always paid for on the backs of the least empowered people. And so to see our students having to shoulder higher tuitions, be put in larger classrooms, especially in an online environment. Online teaching is more work. It's not less work. Online teaching requires smaller classes, not bigger classes. So we're trying to push back and talk about, and it's unclear, but it's likely that CUNY will be online in the fall. And so, trying to make clear what we need, what's at stake, what we really risk by stripping. People have said it, CUNY has already been stripped to the bone, and there's really no more flesh to take away. My background is Brooklyn College, and it looks beautiful from the outside, but when you walk in, you realize that maintenance has been deferred for decades. Ceiling tiles are falling down. The buildings are literally crumbling around us, and now they're taking it out on contingent faculty who are the lowest paid. So, in terms of resisting, we're working through our union, the Professional Staff Congress, which represents 10,000 adjuncts or contingent faculty, 6,700 tenured and tenure track faculty, and lots of other people who don't teach directly but are really responsible for running our programs. But the challenge is that CUNY is massive. We teach 450,000 students. We have 25 campuses across the 5 boroughs. So we're a really big bargaining unit with a lot of people pushing and pulling in different directions with different ideas about how to push back. So, fighting for democracy in our union is part of the struggle of fighting and resisting the budget cuts and the austerity. I can say a lot more, but I'll just leave it at that for now, I think.
Yeah, I just want to ask a really quick follow-up about the Cuny Union. So is that a union that encompasses all professors at CUNY, including tenured and the adjuncts? Okay, and then can you talk a little bit about the fight for progressivism in that union, because that's obviously a really big fight that's happening not just in education unions, but in higher education unions, but in K-12 unions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a history. The academy and universities in general are incredibly hierarchical spaces, and there's a history of really abandoning our contingent faculty. Our adjunct faculty are, up until recently, were paid $3,500 a course, and it's important to recognize that more than half of our courses are taught by adjunct faculty. Now they make about $5,000 a course with our recent contract, but the recent contract was highly disputed, and many people, including myself, didn't feel like it went far enough. There was a struggle for $7,000 a course for adjuncts, which is still pretty much poverty wages, and people struggle to live and pay their rent in this city, and have hundreds of students. So it's really difficult working conditions, and really terrible learning conditions for many of our students whose professors are running between campuses, and pulled in many directions. There's a lot going on in my union to try to challenge the hierarchy and recognize contingent faculty as our colleagues, and fight for them, and fight for a better university through the union. So I can say more, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, our next question is going to be faced towards Jabari. And so since the Chicago teacher strikes, we've seen a historic rise in strike actions, both in K through 12 schools, as well as higher education. And so this is a bit of a two-part question. And so first, what's been driving this rise in strike actions? And then second, how can, in the wake of these teacher strikes, they tend to have a way to influence politics around them more broadly than just education. And so how can eco-socialists use the wake of teachers' strike to affect change?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's a multi-part question. Let me start with the first part about what's driving these, which I think is the fact that teachers are underpaid just everywhere, at all levels of where they teach. And I mean, I think it's just part of a more generic civil unrest with growing inequality and the fact that costs of living are increasing and wages are not. And it's really infuriating for a lot of teachers across the country to be in these conditions. And it's not just the wages, it's overcrowded classrooms. It, for lack of a better word, sucks in an overcrowded classroom because you can't give every student what they need. I teach overcrowded classroom. It sucks because I can't give every student the attention that they need. And I know they're suffering. I know that I am pressed for time and energy and resources because there's too many kids in the room for me to make sure I can give every single one the full education that they deserve. So that's a big part of driving it. It's also just, anti-teacher bias amongst politicians. I mean, I know you saw, a wave of, anti-teacher politicians getting ousted during elections, but also a prevailing sense of blaming teachers for educational failures, tying their success to test scores and then, cutting teachers based on that or whatever, as opposed to blaming underfunding for whenever our students don't succeed as much as we would like them to. So that's driving it a lot. In addition to frustration, disagreements with the the political system we have right now. I know that it wasn't quite the strike didn't happen in New York in response to COVID-19. It was about to because the mayor was dragging his feet to the 11th hour on closing schools down. It was really ridiculous to the point where our union threatened to sue teachers en masse, planning to do sick outs, just not show up as being sick. Because the mayor was refusing to shut down the schools and stop the spread of this virus. So I think, after you asked, what's the potential for this for eco-socialists, or was there something before that?
Yeah, how can just socialist organizations support teachers in this struggle?
Yeah, I mean, we could always use, more militancy in our union. We know that in New York, the Taylor Law is a thing, and ability of public sector workers to strike is a thing. But also, it comes down to whether or not we are getting our union to more forcefully advocate for the needs of our students. And so it's a matter of how deeply are we advocating for the billions of dollars we need in aid? And where the eco-socialist movement comes into this is expanding the notion of what's important for our students. Because I know it can speak for the priorities of the UFT right now with getting the extra billions of dollars in aid for foundation aid funding. It's increasing aid for community schools, it's stopping charter schools, but having a livable planet is also a top priority for our students. So, pushing politicians to fight for a Green New Deal or, really extreme climate resiliency, that's a student issue. If our kids don't have a livable planet in 20 years, it's a big problem. Or if, or Dan, you were talking about just the terrible air quality around your school. I mean, that's the traffic, the amount of fossil fuel vehicles there. That's a student issue. If they don't have clean water, if they're worried about lead in the pipes, that's a student issue. So climate is very involved to making sure our students can literally learn. They actually have the help to learn, but also that they have a future to be in. It's really deeply tied.
That's a perfect. Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, thank you. I remember, Jabari, when you met with the eco-socialists, must have been, it was a couple months ago, but it feels like decades ago. I remember one of the things we talked about was the district where you're running in has, I believe, the worst air quality in Brooklyn. It's not.
I mean, Bed-Stuy, it's higher rates of asthma and a higher than average rate of people dying for preventable reasons. And then there's also parts of like Sunset Park, industrial Sunset Park. I think probably not too far from, I'm not sure where you were teaching, Daniel, but industrial parts, Sunset Park, which are really underserved, highly Latinx, definitely not getting the resources that they need, and right there by the BQE. So, I mean, yeah, it is that, and it is unfortunate that students are asked to learn in those conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this dovetails nicely with our next question. So yeah, this is kind of a more broad political question. One of the things that is really interesting about these teacher strikes that we've seen, they started in West Virginia and spread, is that they have a tendency to kind of remake politics as they go. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was in Kentucky, you had Republican teachers running on pro-teacher platforms defeating anti-teacher Republicans. Like Mitch McConnell's protege lost his primary to a teacher, actually, which is crazy that you would think a strike would have an impact on the Republican side of things. And then, of course, you see this more broadly, not just in Republican politics, thank God, but, you had Matt Bevin, who was probably like one of the worst governors in America, lost to a Democrat in Kentucky, which is kind of an amazing thing. And this was because of the teacher strike. So Jabari, this is another question for you. You're a teacher, you're running for office. Can you tell us a little bit about this mechanism of how strikes kind of remake politics in this way and how we can take advantage of that, particularly here in New York, but also more broadly?
Thank you. I actually didn't even know about, Mitch McConnell's protege getting ousted. That's great. I love whenever pro-teacher people. Well, I hate Mitch McConnell, but two, I love teachers. And so that's just like double whammy. That's a lot of goodness.
Me too.
Yeah, wow. Right crowd.
But no, it's interesting because, these strikes transcend like, a Democrat-Republican divide, right? Because, there are Democrat teachers, there are Republican teachers, there are workers of all stripes across the political spectrum. And strikes remind us of, where divisions lie, that it's, not the continuous media narrative of the left versus right. We have a huge top versus bottom divide in this country. And strikes remind us as workers that, when the bosses and the owners are not giving workers the wealth that they're creating, it's a huge problem. And the way that we build on this is like, this is an election. I'm running a race, but I'm not just running as a teacher. I'm running as a socialist teacher. So it's a class struggle election. It's a time we often remind and to the fact that we need to tax the rich of these policies. When our schools are underfunded, it is because the rich are not taxed heavily enough, right? When charter schools are expanding, it's because the rich are not taxed heavily enough, and people then get worried about the quality of their schools. So many problems come from a lack of investment in our communities, and then that gets compounded by the racism and the sexism that's already present there. So yeah, no, these elections, like building off of these strikes. I mean, if we can get the Taylor law amended to allow for public sector workers to strike, you keep your Triborough amendment. That would be something that would allow such a greater deal of class struggle and much more wins and reforms for working class people in New York, truly.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. My aunt is a teacher at a Catholic school, and like we just don't talk about politics because it's one of those things that, like, you know, it won't end well. But one thing that's interesting is when we talk about teaching, we're on the same page. And we're like both complaining about standardized testing. We're both complaining about class sizes. We're both complaining about underinvestment. We're both complaining about Common Core. And it's a meeting place where we can link together and ideas can be exchanged there. And we can talk about all of the problems in the education system more broadly. And I guess that, like, you know, what you said is absolutely right. Strikes really do provide us with the opportunity to talk about these things and see ourselves as workers, and particularly in opposition to the capitalist forces that are, you know, really oppressing us and causing just all of these problems that we've been talking about.
And I just want to add one tiny thing. I think there's something really electrifying about collective action for people, you know, that really, like, for sometimes workers, for people, this is the first, if you engage in striking, it's the first moment of like really feeling the power of collective movement together and what can be done. And I just think that feeling and that possibility opens up so many opportunities that I hope that we can build on.
Amazing. All right, so this is a more broad question, and it's for both of you, but we'll start with you, Naomi. How can a Green New Deal boost public education in the United States?
I mean, I think, I kind of think of this question, both how a Green New Deal can boost public education, but also how public education boosts the Green New Deal. Like, I think they go together.
Totally.
Like the chicken and egg situation. You know, so I think a Green New Deal is not just about, you know, rapid decarbonization and, you know, recognizing the vast interconnection between imperialism, class exploitation, racism, the crisis of the climate, how they're all connected. But it's also really about rejecting austerity logic and demanding the state invest heavily in creating a just society. So I think, you know, a Green New Deal, it's an investment in all these areas that have been so neglected, including education. So, so I think, you know, that it's recognizing alongside, you know, renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, you know, all the soil and ecosystem restoration, environmental mitigation, like coastal adaptation, and education, right? That like this public education infrastructure has to be part of that. And obviously education feeds right back into it, because not only do we need to teach students to understand climate change science, you know, and be able to speak to it, you know, they also need to understand the history of how we got here, the history of settler colonialism, racism, capitalism, to understand how it is that, you know, not everybody is equally responsible for this climate crisis. Not everybody has equally benefited from this climate crisis. And so I think tracing those dots and connecting those dots for students so that they can understand the context of their lives is incredibly important, having that, a historical understanding of how we got here. But also I think readying them to challenge like the language, a really empty language of sustainability or resiliency that doesn't actually tackle racial and economic injustice, you know, that the ways that resilience, some talk of resiliency and sustainability actually just work to reproduce and deepen and defend the status quo rather than dismantling structures of oppression like we need to do. I mean, I think so flagging for our students, like, you know, this is just superficial BS talk of climate change, you know, and this is actually where we need to go. I think, you know, I think is a really, that's something that I really focus on and emphasize, because there's a lot of greenwashing, and I think students really need to be able to parse the differences.
That was awesome, Naomi. I want to add in, so the need for jobs is so critical. The Green New Deal is jobs. It's good union paying jobs. It's a lot of good green union paying jobs. I have students who are homeless. Every teacher in New York has students that are homeless. 10, around 1 in 10 New York State public school students is homeless or housing insecure. It's sizable, and you know, you don't even need them to tell them. You don't even need them to tell you who they are. You can tell that the kid that's tired all the time because they're housing unstable. They're the kid that says, "Ah, man, I was sleeping at my aunt's place last night. I was sleeping at my grandma's place last night. I was sleeping at my cousin's place last night," because they don't have their place to sleep in. And you know, the need for jobs, you know, and really just really the need for homes for our students is so necessary. And that stability is so necessary for our kids. And just going back to like quality of life stuff, the need for clean air, like I forget how like sensitive my students' senses are. There was this one day they were just like, they walked in the room complaining about a gas smell, and I was like, "There's no gas smell." I'm like, "No, it smells like gas, we swear." I was like, "There really isn't a gas smell." Like, "What are you talking about?" Like, "It smells like gas." We went back and forth. I looked out the window and like I saw that they had like, you know, just started doing construction outside. Like I said, like maybe they popped. I didn't smell it, but I could see the gas line exposed to the street and everything. So, you know, they're still developing. You know, we need to ensure there's good air quality for them, good water quality for them. These are things, you know, the Green New Deal is part of, you know, retrofitting these buildings so that they're not only, you know, more energy efficient and resilient, but so the lead's out so that they are, you know, cleaner and safer for our kids. And yeah, no, it's just important to be making sure that, you know, we're doing everything that we can to ensure that our students are learning, because, you know, if their living conditions are not good, then they won't learn. And if our students aren't learning, our future is kind of screwed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic answers from both of you. Thank you. All right, so this next question is a bit hard for me to capture. I had a lot of trouble writing it. And I don't know if I did the best job writing it, but I tried my best, and that's what counts. Like we tell our students all the time. So this is a thing that's kind of bothered me for a while. You know, one of the really frustrating things about neoliberalism is that it does this so brilliantly evil thing where it says government's not the solution, and then it cuts public goods so they don't work as well, and then say, look, these public goods are terrible. They're not working. We need to cut them more. And the cycle continues until we find that what was once a vibrant public sphere has just been absolutely decimated and is just a shadow of its former self. And I really do see this in teaching, right? Like we have standardized tests that literally traumatize students. I've seen students have panic attacks from homework they've had from test prep. I work as a tutor as well, and I have like my number one thing is math and test anxiety, just helping kids through that psychologically, not even teaching, just helping them with that psychologically. So we have ended, not to mention the fact that we've just cut so many programs that just make school fun, right? Like wood shop, art, PE, cooking, right? Like all of those things that are enjoyable, like auto body shop. I remember watching Grease as a kid and they had auto body shop and I was like, whoa, that's so cool. But we don't have that anymore. And that is really upsetting. And it has really led to this world where we only see teaching as a thing that helps you get a job. The whole idea of learning for learning's sake has really just disappeared. And we see school as a thing that we must endure, that we must be sometimes even traumatized by, so that we can eventually be exploited by capitalism when we become adults. So this is a really hard thing to reverse, and this might be an impossible to answer question, but I still want to hear this from both of you. How do we reverse this, and how do we, you know, show that we can have, how do we convince people that learning for learning's sake is actually a really great and wonderful thing?
I mean,
you can take 10 seconds.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Jabari. You got it.
I mean, high stakes testing has got to go. You know, this notion of everything writing on one test at the end of the year, and that's whether you know you had a good year or a bad year is not good. It's funny. I mean, I'm a math teacher, so I do you know assess my kids a lot just to see you know what they're getting or not. But it's never high stakes. It's like it's just you know a thing we do to see if they are following or not. You know, and if they're not following, we just learn it again. It's not high stakes. You know, I never tell them like you're not a good person. You don't get a good score on Wednesday's quiz. You know, or like wow, well you have failed for the year. You know, I wouldn't. That's not a thing I do. And it's kind of exciting for them too, to like, especially when, you know, when they get immediate feedback, like, oh, cool, I got that wrong. Well, why? You know, we have a discussion about it. So this notion of like making them feel and letting people know that it's not so much about the grade. This is something that I've been doing too, just with parents during this pandemic. Like so many parents I had just email me like freaking out. Look, I'm sorry, we were doing something. My kid missed class, we missed the quiz. Can you make it up? Can you do this? Can you make up the assignment? I'm just like, of course, don't worry about the grade. I would never fail somebody during a pandemic. Just do they learn it at some point, please? Just let them do it so they learn it. But just like it's okay. But these parents, I mean, we have it wrapped up in their head that you know if their kid doesn't get the right score, and I teach middle school, so they're like if they don't get into the right score in 6th and 7th grade, they won't go to the right high school, and then they won't go to the right college, and they won't get the right job, and it's just like inculcated into them that like everything has to be perfect, and the amount of pressure that leaks into their students. I mean, I had a student that got less than a 90 once, and he's like, my parents are gonna kill me, and he just starts crying. And it's because of the culture of high stakes testing that we do, that says everything is writing on this one test. That's what it is. This is your final video game boss that you must defeat, and you know all your work is naught if you don't do this. So that's one way we gotta just you know get rid of this culture of like it all leads up to the test.
Mm-hmm.
I say that's a school that tests that's the culture of my school that I teach in. It's a test heavy school. That's like its thing.
Yeah, I don't know. That was great, Jabari. I don't know if I have a great answer. I mean, I think, you know, I teach anthropology, which for most of my students, they have to like convince their parent, you know, their parents get very upset if they major in anthropology, because what do you do with an anthropology undergraduate degree? It's not clear. And many of our students are, you know, that is their primary upward social mobility is their primary reason for being in college. And so, you know, it's a struggle to explain, but I think many students really get it when they're allowed to work on projects that affect them directly, that come from their lives, and then they can see how learning about their world gives them the tool to be happy. I mean, that's, you know, to really find fulfillment and enjoy and connect with people, you know? So, you know, and also I try to say, and that kind of work doesn't always, but sometimes really does lead to the meaningful kind of jobs that they want, you know? So, you know, I mean, it's hard to balance this being ridiculous and pie in the sky and naive about the way that the world works, while also saying like, you should really pursue things that you care about, and that are meaningful to you and will make a difference to you. You know, I think like, so at Brooklyn College, CUNY includes a lot of community colleges and what they call senior colleges, which are the four-year colleges. But a lot of our community colleges, they don't use the term vocational training really anymore. They talk about like workforce preparation or preparedness, or, you know, they talk about the skills that employers seek. You know, we all want to see our students succeed and get jobs, but you know, I think that there is a really alarming kind of privatization happening at some of the community colleges, like at Kingsborough Community College. They have this really active partnership with National Grid, actually. So this like directly ties into the eco-socialist struggle, where they're training, they have like it's customer experience management program where they train Kingsborough Community College students to be call center operators. So it's like this 2-year education is all set up for this low wage work, and not that that work can't or doesn't have dignity, but these students are not given the tools or the possibility to think, to explore what else they might be interested in. It's a very, it's a tracking system, and it's, and it's producing workers and fitting them into what corporations are asking for. That's what's happening in some of our higher educational programs. So I think that there's a real struggle there, and an important way to talk about how that's a sort of creeping privatization of public universities, this like connection with these corporate companies like National Grid. It's kind of a rambling response. I don't know if I really got there, but
No, it was really fantastic. I also just really want to give a shout out to anthropology. My best friend is Caribbean. He went to Kingsborough. He took an anthropology course, and there he found out that the United States sends spoiled powdered milk to Caribbean nations. And he discovered his family growing up. He's from St. Vincent. His family growing up kept getting sick. And that's when he discovered that was why, because of that powdered milk that they were having. So
Wow.
I don't know if that helped him get a job, but that is like crucial knowledge he needed to know. And he had that from an anthropology course. So I know everyone makes fun of anthropology, but that's BS. That anthropology is fantastic and we should be learning it. I want to ask Jabari, I want to ask you a follow-up, particularly as a candidate for state senate. So I went to public school in New York, and we have cops, like literal police officers stationed in our school. They're called school safety officers. I thought that was kind of normal until I went to college and made friends from not New York. And they were like, what? Why do you have police officers in your school? Like, that's ridiculous. I was like, yeah, you have the rent-a-cops that go to your school. So Jabari, I really want to ask you, as a teacher, as a state senate candidate, why are these school safety officers so problematic for our students? And also, what can we do to just get them out of our schools? And what, especially if you're elected, will you do as a state senator to get these officers out of our schools?
So I'll start with the first question, which is why they're so problematic. They can become a crutch for some teachers who don't know how to talk to students. I remember the day that administration had to send a letter to to teachers being like, please do not call the school safety agent because a student was rude to you. Please do not call the student safety agent because a student will not, I don't know, sit down. Or in their seat. Please do not escalate and call the school safety agent for every little thing, because some teachers will just escalate. They don't understand how to de-escalate with students. They think, all right, my way, the highway, or okay, fine, I'm calling the school cop on you. And that's how we end up with the school to prison pipeline, right? Because it's this sense of immediate compliance or you're out. Speaking to my school specifically too, it's crazy. I mean, the fact that we always have money for these safety officers and not enough counselors. We have 4 counselors in my school and it has 1,400 kids. That is a terrible ratio. Just imagine if you needed to speak to somebody, if you needed therapy and you had to share your therapist with 300 other people, when would you ever get seen? And it's so there have been times where there's one student that she was visibly upset. She had some scissors, and I was like, can you please give me the scissors? She was like, I'm so mad, I want to stab somebody. I was like, yeah, that's not okay. We have to have a conversation. And I couldn't, the line out, there was no way to get in contact with a counselor because we're so packed up. So, I'm trying to talk her down. Meanwhile, also, and Dan, you've done that dance of trying to you're trying to help one kid and then one eye on the one kid, one and the other eye on the other 29 in the classroom, making sure it's all good. But that's a resource thing, right? It's we need enough counselors so that we have somebody that these kids can talk to when they're so stressed out to the point where they have a scissors and as a state senator, what we can do is we can fight for full funding for these counselors. They can have someone to talk to, and ultimately we need to get the cops out of our schools. I mean obviously someone at the front desk to make sure nobody walks off the street and does whatever to the students, but not a vanguard of people that are like at the call, at the ready to drag a student out of the classroom or manhandle them or whatever.
Yeah. There's a story, Jabari, do you know about the metal detectors at Murrow?
No.
Not at Murrow, at Madison?
No.
You hear about it? Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, there was like at Madison High School, I don't know if they still have it, but they had it when I was in middle school. They had metal detectors, and like students would be late for class because they would be having to go through metal detectors that were getting set up. And like if you were late for class because there was a long line at the metal detector, that was your fault. And that's absurd. I remember growing up and thinking like, yeah, that's normal. You go through a metal detector on your way to school. But now I look back on it and it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate position to put them in. Be like,
yeah,
oh, you're late because we were like, scabbing you through a metal detector.
Yeah,
why did you come earlier?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we don't know the students' life. I have a girl that just comes late pretty much every day, but because she's like 11-year-old girl, she walks her 7-year-old brother to school, and then she comes to get her own education, and she's late. But it's I understand why. She's looking out for her family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. So switching gears a tiny bit, but not much. I started off writing this next question to be about climate change specifically, and how there's different ways that people learn about it, including not learning about it at all when they're in school. Or, I mean, for me, for example, I definitely learned about it in like middle school and high school, but kind of as like a distant thing that existed, but like we'll figure that out. It's just like this, it's global warming. It's just this thing that's happening. And, but I'm now realizing that it was a really similar way of learning about like imperialism or the civil rights movements, or like all these really challenging social and environmental, but I guess all really social issues. And it's not like they're going to get any easier to teach people about climate change, or it's not going to get any easier to teach people about racial violence and police brutality. And so I would just love to hear about how do you discuss these things with your students, and just if you feel there's a way to do so that turns them into actors.
I'll take a stab. Yeah, I think that's a great question. In some ways, I think the climate change conversation actually does get a little bit easier when people have first person experience with it, right? So many of my students, I taught a class this semester focused on climate change and community activism, specifically about the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where I live and where I am doing research, and I'm an activist. We started talking about Sandy, and many of my students have very vivid memories of Sandy, and many of my students are from the Caribbean and have family members that have, recently gone through incredible Hurricane Maria, et cetera, right? So there were a lot of touchstones to talk about what does this actually mean for people's lives. And then when we get into talking about environmental racism and environmental justice movements and air quality and asthma and many of the things that Jabari was talking about, you can see the lights go off in people's heads about their own experience and their own respiratory challenges and the challenges of their families. So I think, for me, the strength of cultural anthropology is really drawing on people's experiences, your own experience, but then being able to interview and talk and learn about other people's lives. So that's what we did in this class. And we looked at the concrete struggle over New York City's plan to build coastal adaptation infrastructure on the Lower East Side. They're planning, although maybe it's on hold, a $1.5 billion project to build the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, which is a series of walls and now raised levee to defend the Lower East Side, the East Village from storm surge and coastal flooding. But what was really great was students got to see how complicated this question was, how there's a lot of community struggle over it, and woven into this struggle are questions of environmental racism, the history of, why it is that public housing was built along the waterfront, the land value, why there's a Con Ed peaker plant right there, why, so, like all those questions really in a specific place and time came together for people. And then, all my students almost all of them are New Yorkers. So talking about their own neighborhoods where they grew up and the similarities and differences, the history of Robert Moses designing these neighborhoods and roads and his racism and how that shaped their own community. So I think it's like, because these things are intertwined, you sort of pull one thread and then it like leads to the whole carpet. I don't know whatever the metaphor is, but it all comes together. And when you really connect it to their own experience and their family's experience, I think it sticks in a different way.
This Jabari, I know you're a math teacher, so
man,
I don't know how
I was like, this is gonna be a short answer. But okay, so please forgive me. So climate change has not worked itself heavily into my math classroom. But you know what? I did partner with other teachers to try and get the state test moved. Gonna fall on Earth Day, and the middle school math state test is coming on Earth Day, and we were thinking like this is a really students aware and active and out, to protest and being aware of Mother Earth and limits. I mean, it's been incredible seeing student activism around the climate recent years and how they're really becoming a movement. Obviously, COVID-19 happened and all the tests were canceled. But there's a real opportunity to ensure that our youth, our teenagers, even our preteens are getting involved in this activism and ready to join the strikes or continue the work, fighting for a green new future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the little follow-up to that might be in terms of student activism is just that like one of a really large step that students have been able to take are the climate strikes and walkouts. And I'm curious if you have thoughts about how the teacher's role in that movement is.
Yeah, I mean, for our kids, so I'm able to do some teachers do like a digital walkout of just saying, we're standing out here for our for the climate, sharing images of ourselves on social media, but also like empowering our students to take action on their own, really giving them the tools to rallies. I mean, I'm just so floored by the amount of activism that I've seen that recently, and whatever we can do to empower them and make them feel like this is their future and they have a right to fight for it. We should be taking those steps.
Yeah, building on that, I think there are a lot of incredible activist students at Brooklyn College and across CUNY. And I also find that many of our students participating in politics and outside political demonstrations are really scary and really threatening to their families. And so that's some of the things that I talk about with my students. Many of their communities have been terrorized by the NYPD. And we had an NYPD officer, an undercover officer posing as a Muslim student from between 2001 and 2015, I think, and infiltrated Muslim student groups pretending to be a student to spy on them. So there's really immediate serious trauma and in addition to regular police violence and brutality. So there's a lot of fear about political participation. So, I try to talk about that and talk about normalize it in some ways, there's this march, or did anybody go to that march, or there's this upcoming thing, have you heard about it? And try to sort of get it on their radar and elicit things. And then also just get them talking about it, to try to encourage one another to be involved with things. But I'll stop there.
Awesome, thank you. Jabari, now you have me. I used to work as a math tutor, so now you have me thinking about like how to make climate change math lessons.
Yes.
There's so much math and climate change.
Yeah, there's so much.
I promise.
Like, how do I make a middle school? Yeah, we can talk about
like
degree.
the ratio of solar panels to power plants.
Yeah, right. We're talking about decarbonization rates. Yeah. You've inspired. Maybe I'll write something up.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
How much wealth is at the top over how much wealth is at the bottom?
Yeah, the socialist math curriculum. I love it. All right, so yeah, we're entering the wrap-up phase of the interview. So yeah, this is for both Jabari and Naomi. Who is the most memorable teacher you've had?
Immediately for me, it's this Khan, who was my 7th grade English teacher. Actually, I know I teach math, my 7th grade English teacher, and he made this journal, and I hated writing. We had to journal every day. And end of 7th grade, he pick up our journals and take them with us. And I forgot, and I journaled in it all year and like decorated and stuff, and forgot about it, and then really forgot about 7th grade everything about. But then about like 10 years later or so, I was reaching out to my old middle school about doing some political theater there. And Mike was still teaching, and he was like, "Oh yeah, come by. And also, I have you when you come." I met up to talk with him about doing stuff there. My 7th grade journal that he'd held onto for years.
Wow.
His little 7th grade, his little like dorky 7th grade students' little like composition notebook journal with like a Pokemon card taped on top. He had held onto it for 10 years. I don't know where, and he gave it to me, and could not believe that his dedication to his students. Truly.
That's amazing.
That's really lovely. I think I've been thinking more about, I have 2 small kids, and so one is in 2nd grade and one is 4 years old. And so I've been just so amazed by their teachers in the past few months, and, being on the end is like trying to teach my own classes, but then observing and trying to manage my children's relationship with their teachers has been so important to get through these past few months. Just the consistency and like love and care and attention and honesty, about what we're going through together. I think like I couldn't have made it throughout these couple months without their just like intense care for my kids and commitment to, intertwined in that commitment to their education and 2nd grade math. And I don't understand how they teach how to add these days. It's totally different. but yeah, observing that has just, obviously I value teachers, but it has put a whole new layer for me to understanding the work and care that goes into this work we do.
Naomi, my mom's a 2nd grade teacher, and I can attest to the fact that they teach math differently than I learned it.
I could rant for at least an hour about the new ways that they teach math. I'm sure you could too, Jabari.
I feel like just in this last hour talking to you guys, I have a million more questions I'd love to ask, but just kind of to close things up, is there anything that we haven't asked you about that you wish we would have asked you about that you want an opportunity to talk about a little bit more?
I want to talk about how we can support Jabari's campaign.
We were hoping you'd say that.
I can answer that. So.
It's been such an honor to be in this conversation with you, Jabari. It's really lovely to hear more about your life as a teacher.
Likewise. But yeah, no, everyone listening or about to listen, please support. The election's in 3.5 weeks. We're in like very high stakes now. It's literally down to the wire. This is whether, we make it or break it. And we're charging ahead. I mean, if you had told me this gay socialist public school teacher was about to be a state senator like a couple of years ago, I would have just told you were like a complete buffoon. I was like, who would elect a person like that? But here we are chugging along with like volunteers making calls every single day for the campaign, with people helping out however they can, writing postcards, distributing posters, donating to the campaign, whatever they can. Our biggest push right now is just reaching out to as many voters as possible. We're phone banking every single day. If you just go to the website, jabariforstatesenate.com, you can plug into literally any event. They're right there on the front page. Hop on. It's super easy. We have an automatic dialer, so you don't use your own phone. We have a script, so if it's your first time, you have a script to help you along, and we have a training every single time, so you know exactly what you're doing.
And in an earlier working group meeting, we had somebody point out that it's a great time to phone bank because a lot of people you call really want the chance to talk to somebody else.
It's not as scary as you think it is. It is a little scary, but the fear goes away and you're really helping a wonderful candidate. I'd also like to plug, Jabari, while we're on the subject of your campaign, the Eco-Socialist Working Group is raising money for Jabari's campaign and also Farah Soufran Forrest's campaign, who is running for state assembly in a district that overlaps Jabari. And we are trying to raise $7,000 to put out a climate-themed mailer for Jabari and Farah. We've already raised over $3,000, but we still have a long ways to go to our goal. So if you would like to donate, and we really would love it if you donated, please go to bit.ly/Jabari and Jabari Farah. So that's JABARIPHARA, bit.ly/Jabari and Farah. And please donate. We'd really appreciate it. And we're really hoping to get that climate mailer out before the election deadline on June 23rd.
Well, thanks so much for hosting this, guys.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate having both of you on. Yeah, this has been a great conversation despite everything that's been happening in the world. I'm really glad that we were able to do this.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's just it's a hard time. So we really appreciate your willingness to share what you're thinking about these days.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so we're going to say goodbye to Naomi and Jabari, and we are going to have a presentation on our public power campaign if you would like to get involved. So yeah, again, Naomi and Jabari, thank you so much for joining us. We had a great time.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, so yeah, if you are watching this or if you are going to watch this on our YouTube page, we have a public power campaign that is really going strong. We actually just had a really awesome victory yesterday where we found out that the utilities, there has been a moratorium on utility shutoffs for the duration of the COVID crisis, and that was just officially put into law yesterday and extended for 180 days after the crisis ends, which has been something we've been pushing for literally months. The shutdown moratorium that existed before was purely voluntary, which meant that National Grid or Con Ed could start shutting off power to vulnerable people, and also some private water companies had already been doing that. So we're really glad that it has now been officially signed into law, and that's the result of really hard organizing that we've been doing over the past couple months. So if you just bear with me for a moment, just going to share my screen. Whoops, sorry about that. The wrong share, there we go. All right, great. So yeah, this is just our basic onboarding presentation that we give to members who are interested in getting involved, interested in hearing more about our campaign. So yeah, if you're interested in getting involved, this is the presentation for you. But before I begin, I also just want to one more time plug the fundraising link for Jabari and Farah. That is bit.ly/Jabari Farah, JABARIPHARA. So please log on and donate. We really need to get to $7,000, and this could really make a difference in two very tight elections. So yeah, let's talk about our public power campaign. So before we really jump into what public power is, we need to talk about what the grid is. So the grid is the thing that gets you your electricity. And it's made up of three parts. The first one is generation. That's the power plants, solar panels, the whatever, the men on treadmill, like in that one good episode of Black Mirror, that create your electricity. Then you have transmission. Those are these like really big energy lines that you see. If you ever drive into New York from Yonkers, you can see them going into Yonkers. You've seen them. They're all over the place. So that's transmission. And then you have distribution. Those are the smaller local systems that bring that electricity to consumers. And the companies that own and maintain transmission and distribution infrastructure are called utilities. In New York City, our electric utility is a company called Con Edison or Con Ed. Just in terms of who owns what, generation is also privately owned. That is owned by typically very small companies that will own one or two, like fossil fuel generating plants. And hedge funds kind of own all of those as conglomerates. So the whole system is privately owned and is for profit. All right, so how does the grid work? The answer is not well, not for everyone. So your electricity utility is a monopoly. And the way that works is New York State has given Con Ed a section of the state, in this case, New York City, that they can serve free from all competition. So in return for getting that monopoly, which, companies aren't supposed to have, the company is supposed to provide low cost, reliable power. The thing, though, is that doesn't ever happen. So the reason why this never happens is that Con Ed is owned by its investors. It makes money off of return on its investments. So if it builds new infrastructure, that's the only time it actually makes money. So they actually have an incentive to build out more and more infrastructure, typically fossil fuel infrastructure. This made sense in the early days of the grid when no one had electricity and we needed to incentivize companies to build out as quickly as possible, but now it doesn't make as much sense. Now, in theory, the group, this thing called the Public Service Commission is supposed to regulate the utilities and make all of the rules that they abide by. But the PSC, the Public Service Commission, is appointed by the governor, not elected by the people, and therefore they have an incentive to follow the governor's wishes. And then the governor, in turn, he has an incentive to cater to fossil fuel interests and investors because they're the ones donating money to his campaign. You might have heard of a term called regulatory capture. That's when private companies take over the regulators that are supposed to be regulating them. In this case, the Public Service Commission is under regulatory capture by Con Edison. Recently, they just approved a rate hike for Con Edison, so congratulations, your electricity bill is going up. And the head of the Public Service Commission actually said that she thought that they should be getting a higher rate hike than they actually got. This is the lady who's supposed to be regulating Con Edison. All right. So the system was terrible before, and now it's an absolute disaster. Like I said, Con Ed won a raise to their fixed charge in the rate case. That's the money you have to pay regardless of your energy usages. And this came a couple months ago after a year of devastating blackouts and shutoffs, which they weren't responsible for. You probably remember this. There was a ton of blackouts over the summer in 2019. So Con Ed made $1 billion in profits last year, and of that, they paid out $846 million to their shareholders in the form of dividends. Their CEO, John McAvoy, makes $9.5 million a year, or $4,142 an hour. So this is the statistic that I always bother my friends about. That $846 million was literally just going to line the pockets of Wall Street. That money could have gone to lowering charges, building out more renewable energy, fixing the grid so we didn't have this many blackouts. Instead, it went to investors. In October 2019, utilities served 7,000 shutoffs in a single month across New York. That's 7,000 people who lost all of their electricity in New York alone. So right now, there have been 16 million US unemployment claims filed. That's actually wrong. That's more like 25 million. This is way more than the last recession. And this is just the beginning of the economic impact of COVID-19. So utilities do not care about people, and they cannot be allowed to shape the response to this crisis. So that means that we are going to see shutoffs. Once the shutoff moratorium is lifted, we are going to see shutoffs happen all across the city and state. So we have an alternative. It is an eco-socialist energy grid, and it's really based on 4 key points. The first one is decarbonization. We need to move away from dirty energy and towards renewable energy. We need to decommodify the grid. Energy is a basic human right, not a commodity to be sold for a profit at the expense of people. We need to democratize the grid. Everyday people need to have a say in the process. Community-controlled energy is the only way to guarantee a just transition to renewables. And we need to decolonize. We need to recognize the sovereignty of Indigenous people with rights to free, prior, and informed consent. We need to demilitarize, welcome refugees, and decarbonize more quickly than the global South, who have contributed the least to and will suffer the most from the climate crisis. The decolonize point is really important because when colonization began, so too did our extractive economy. We really just take as much as we need as much as we want from the natural world and leave wastelands in our wake. We're really seeing this with the climate crisis, where we have basically completely destroyed our planet's ecosystems and our carbon cycle so that we could have this economy that benefits the top 1% and nobody else. This is ridiculous. And we need to really move away from our extractive economy, the way we view the earth. And we need to start thinking about a more just decolonized society. Oh, this is the public power campaign. This is where we've been and where we are going now. So what does organizing for public power mean right now? It's obvious that we need basic control of our basic necessities, including our electricity system. And people are struggling right now with low wages, unemployment, economic disruption, sick family members. And the most important thing we can do is ensure financial support to people and make sure that their power does not cut off. No one should have their power cut off during a pandemic. So yeah, the PSC ordered a moratorium on shutoffs that will expire in 3 months. If we don't organize now, this could be a time bomb of death for working class New Yorkers. So like I said in the beginning, this is actually a little outdated. Just yesterday, we had our first victory, and we really did get that moratorium codified into law. It is going to exist for the duration of the crisis. So as long as the governor's state of emergency is in place, no one will have their power shut off. And then it will extend for 180 days past the end of the state of emergency for those who can prove that they are being financially affected by COVID-19. The 180 days is great. We think it should be longer, and we don't want means testing. There should be no shutoffs for 2 years because it's going to take at least 2 years for our economy to get back on track. Even if we have a vaccine developed in the coming months, we are still going to be seeing COVID ravaging our communities for at least 2 years, and we do not want any shutoffs to be happening during a pandemic. Ideally, after we've moved to an eco-socialist energy grid, we don't want any shutoffs, period. If you're in New York City and you have, our water is actually municipally owned, you never get your water shut off. That just never happens to you. And that would be insane, losing your water. That's a human rights violation almost, but that happens in places that don't have municipal water systems. Unfortunately, in places that do have some municipal water systems as well. But we need the same thing for energy. You should never have to have your power taken away from you because you cannot afford to pay. So one thing we've really been pushing for is we have called for an end to rent during this time. We've partnered with Housing Justice for All, which is a really fantastic housing coalition. They won the largest expansion of rent laws, of rent regulations in a generation last year. And we're calling for an end to rent and an end to utility payments during this time. So in normal world, this is our typical campaign structure. We have and actually still now. We have a lobbying working group. We lobby our representatives and help identify our opposition. We have a research team that basically does legislative research, drafts bills, does corporate research on our targets. Unfortunately, as you can really clearly see, we spend a lot of bandwidth on research because this stuff is so complicated. So we really need folks to help us with research. This is building on our canvassing operations. Right now it's building on our phone bank operations. Communications, creating campaign materials, websites, spreading our story in the media. Outreach, focus on reaching out to other organizations, community groups, and politicians, and then also member training and organizing, making sure we are growing our base of committed volunteer leaders. So if any of these sound interested to you, please sign up. You can go to publicpower.nyc to get involved. We really need folks to get involved. We really need, and even if none of these sound particularly, if you don't feel that you can do any of these, we promise to train you and give you the support you need. I just got involved in this last summer in July. I didn't know about any of this, but really quickly I was given support, really all of the support that I needed to become an effective organizer, and we can support you too. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really great time. And I hope that you really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that you will get more involved with the Eco-Socialist Working Group. I hope